We didn't know what we were doing when we landed on Cerelon. Not really. Earth had just broken into deep space travel a few decades ago, and our maps were still being scribbled in pencil, so to speak. Cerelon wasn't even supposed to be inhabited, at least not according to the Centauri Accord's star charts. But it was, and not by just any species. The Vari were there. To most of the galaxy, the Vari were myths, dead, extinct, stories told to scare young aliens into obedience. They were once called the Keepers of the Eternal Tongue, the Songborn, the rulers of the Thousand Sectors. That was until they vanished, consumed by what historians guessed was internal decay and spiritual collapse. So imagine our surprise when our scout ship, the Dogma's Edge, sent back a transmission. Ruins covered in strange symbols, and living beings that didn't match any known species. At first, the Galactic Council laughed at us. Humans were new, loud, and always chasing stories like we were trying to prove something. The idea that we had found living Vari, or something connected to them, was hilarious to them. They joked that we probably mistook rocks for ruins and shadows for aliens. But we knew what we saw. Our team, a crew of 10, half scientists, half security, landed on Cerelon with hearts pounding and minds racing. The air was breathable, thick with humidity, and there was a strange vibration in it, like sound trying to take form. The ground itself seemed to hum under our boots. And those symbols? They weren't just carved. They were alive. Glowing, singing, almost, but too low for the ear to catch. At the center of the ruins stood a dome, black as night, built from a material that didn't reflect light, didn't register on our instruments, and didn't look like anything made in this universe. Inside it were statues, ancient and towering, beings with faces like lions and wings made of crystal. They stood silent, heads bowed, arms outstretched as if offering something we couldn't understand. Then there were the locals, not Vari, not really, but changed by them. A smaller, hunched race with violet eyes and silver skin. They called themselves Null. They didn't speak in words, but in harmonies, notes strung together like sentences. Our translators failed. Our universal comms blanked out. But one thing kept happening over and over. They pointed at us, more specifically at me, Alex Rourke, and hummed a single rising tone that made the statue's eyes glow faintly. The scientists thought it was just a reaction to sound frequencies. I didn't, because when they hummed, I heard words, not with my ears, with something deeper, in my chest, in my bones, like a memory that wasn't mine. They said, "The blood of old walks again." I didn't tell the others. Not then. I just nodded and played along as the mission leader, Dr. Janeth Hahn, took samples and clicked photos. I smiled when the Null offered us fruits that sang when bitten, and when the walls of the temple shimmered with the breath of ancient wind. But I couldn't stop thinking about that feeling. Like I knew this place, like these ruins weren't just ruins. They were waiting. On the third night, I found an old chamber below the dome. Alone. No lights, just that deep vibration in the air. There were carvings on the walls, and when I touched them, my fingers lit up with golden lines. My voice, my actual voice, started humming, like my throat was no longer mine. And I chanted something. Words I had never learned, but they poured from me as if I'd known them for lifetimes. The hymns of the Vari kings. The statues outside woke up. And across the galaxy, the other species who once ruled and mocked us felt it. The Vari were back, and they were singing through us. Everything changed after that night. The others didn't believe me when I told them what happened. I didn't blame them. If I hadn't felt it crawling through my veins, I probably wouldn't believe it either. I told Janeth and the rest of the crew about the hidden chamber, the carvings, the golden light, the hymn that forced itself from my throat. She just looked at me like I'd gone space mad. Sleep deprivation, she said. Maybe even exposure to some alien pollen. You've been off since we landed. But she couldn't explain the tremor in the earth that followed, or how the sky had shifted slightly, like the stars themselves were leaning in to listen. Or how the temple's entrance, which had remained closed since we arrived, slowly opened on its own the next morning. The Null were waiting outside, all of them kneeling. I remember stepping out of my tent, groggy and angry, thinking maybe it was another weird ritual. But they weren't bowing to the temple. They were bowing to me. All of them, their violet eyes dimmed with reverence, their silvery hands placed flat against their chests. I'd never seen anything so humbling or terrifying. Janeth tried speaking to them again, but they wouldn't answer her. They only sang to me. And when they did, my head started pounding with memories that weren't mine. A throne room in a mountain made of light, armies of beasts kneeling in formation, a voice, deep and metallic, whispering across galaxies. It was too much. I collapsed. When I woke up, they had brought me into the temple. The dome above glowed with symbols I could now read. It wasn't language, not in the traditional sense. It was music made physical, script born from vibration. I reached up and touched one of the symbols, and suddenly I knew its meaning. Resurrection. The temple wasn't just a place of worship. It was a machine, a spiritual engine, one designed to awaken something ancient and something terrifying. That's when I realized the Null weren't worshipping me because they thought I was some prophet. They believed I was a key, a living descendant of the Vari bloodline, left behind when the last of their kings vanished into stardust. A spark. I didn't know how to feel. I was just some kid from Mars Colony 7, a dropout who stumbled his way into xenoarchaeology because I couldn't stand working under domes all my life. I wasn't a king. I wasn't special. But the temple thought otherwise. We stayed for 2 more days while the rest of the crew continued with their documentation. But something had changed in the air. The Null kept their distance from the others now. They stopped sharing food. They wouldn't respond to anyone except me. One of the security guys, Brenner, started getting paranoid. "This whole place gives me the creeps," he muttered during watch. "Those freaks stare at you like you're God, and the minute you're gone, they shut down, like puppets, like something's controlling them." He wasn't wrong. They were puppets, but not in the way he thought. They were conduits, living echoes of a time when sound and will ruled the stars. The Vari had created them to maintain this world, to keep the hymns alive until the bloodline returned. Until I returned. That night, the stars blinked red, not twinkling, blinking, rhythmic, a signal, and every Null in the village began to sing at once, a low, heavy chant, rolling through the ground, shaking our bones, bringing the statues back to life one by one, not fully alive, more like aware, watching. Janeth tried to stop them. She panicked. She ordered Brenner and the rest to secure the perimeter and demanded I put an end to it. I told her I couldn't, because the hymns weren't a song anymore. They were a command, and whatever had been sleeping here for millennia was finally listening. Janeth kept trying to hold the team together, but it was obvious she'd lost control. Every member of the expedition was shaken, some physically ill from the endless humming that vibrated through the temple walls, others mentally fraying around the edges from lack of sleep and sheer confusion. But not me. I felt clearer than ever. It wasn't like I understood everything. The language of the Vari wasn't just speech or thought. It was a feeling. And the more I opened myself to it, the more it responded. Words hummed in my chest. Symbols on the wall pulsed when I passed. I could hear the memories of the stone itself, like a ghost of the past reaching out through sound. The Null began constructing something just outside the temple gates. It wasn't with tools, and it wasn't with effort. They sang it into existence. With synchronized notes and vibrating chants, stones lifted and shaped themselves, air solidified into thin sheets of crystal, and a tower began to rise. When Janeth saw it, she lost it. "This is insane! You can't honestly believe this is okay. We're supposed to observe, not awaken, ancient space gods." I didn't know how to explain to her that it was already too late. Whatever we had triggered wasn't going to stop just because we packed our bags and left. And then came the fleet. Not human, not Vari. Galactic Council emissaries. 3 ships, sleek and silver, floating above the ruins like silent judges. They'd intercepted our emergency pings, and apparently someone back on Earth had leaked the findings. The Council couldn't risk humans being the first species to reactivate something like this, especially not alone. They demanded to land, to investigate, to take control of the site under the Precursor Artifact Act. Janeth agreed before I could even argue, so the diplomats and observers arrived, dressed in their ceremonial robes and pretending to care about cultural preservation. There were 3 species: Elari, with their glassy eyes and smooth, almost featureless faces; Vortans, big and scaled, always sneering; and the Perun, floating jellyfish who clicked and blinked light to communicate. They stepped into the ruins like tourists. But I knew they were afraid. They recognized the architecture, the energy, the resonance. And most of all, they recognized me. The Elari delegate approached me with forced calm. "You must stop this. You don't understand what you're awakening. The Vari were not kings. They were tyrants." "They were gods," I said quietly. "And they're coming back." The delegate looked almost pained. "You're being used. That blood in you, it's dangerous. It's corrupted. That's why we buried this world. Why we erased its name from the star maps." I stared at him. "You were afraid of them." He didn't deny it. That night they tried to kill me. 3 Vortan soldiers crept into my quarters. Silenced weapons. No warning. Just a clean execution. But the temple reacted before they got close. A wall of light erupted from the floor, throwing them across the room. Their weapons melted in their hands. And in the corner, one of the statues, its eyes still dim, turned ever so slightly to face them. The message was clear. I wasn't alone. The Council emissaries claimed it was a malfunction, a misunderstanding. They withdrew their men and apologized. But the damage was done. The Null hissed at them now, refused to sing in their presence. Even Janeth, after seeing what happened, stopped trying to de-escalate. She pulled me aside. "What are you becoming, Alex?" I didn't have an answer, because I didn't feel like just me anymore. I was remembering too much. Things I never lived, things that weren't human. Wars fought with sound. Thrones that floated above oceans of silence. Betrayals etched in melody. The death of an empire that refused to be forgotten. And then, a vision. A star, a prison, a gate, locked with a final hymn. And I knew, the temple wasn't the only one. There were others, across the stars, sleeping, waiting for the hymns to find them. And now we had started the chorus. The Council ships left orbit the next day. They didn't say much, didn't offer explanations, no farewells. They just cut contact, powered up, and jumped to light speed, vanished like ghosts too scared to admit what they'd just seen. But their silence said everything. They were afraid, not just of the Vari returning, but of us, the humans who could bring them back. Janeth tried to send one last message to Earth before their comms blackout kicked in. I don't know what she said, or if it even got through. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Because something had already answered us, and it wasn't from Earth. That same night, the tower the Null had sung into existence finished itself with a final chord that cracked the sky. A beam of sound, not light, sound shot upward into the atmosphere, pulsing with golden glyphs and impossible frequencies. It was beautiful and violent. You could feel it inside your bones, vibrating every molecule until you wanted to scream or sing or both. I did neither. Instead, I stood beneath it, surrounded by Null, as the tower sent its message into space, and deep inside, I understood what it said. A call to all surviving Vari constructs, a summons to all forgotten temples, a challenge to all who had buried the past. The blood has returned. The chorus begins again. Across the galaxy, those ancient places, lost, sealed, erased, began to wake up. We didn't know it yet, but on the desolate moon of Jira, a vault opened for the first time in 10,000 years. On the burning world of Ilarkan, a desert storm began to whisper the names of kings. And in the ruins of a long-dead space station orbiting Theta Prime, a derelict Vari archive blinked back to life. One by one, they responded to the hymn, and the galaxy trembled. But while the stars stirred, things on Cerelon got worse. Brenner was the first to snap. He'd never trusted the Null, never liked the singing, and after the Council's failed assassination attempt, he was convinced I'd gone full dictator, possessed or worse. He pulled a weapon on me during breakfast, told Janeth she could either sedate me or help him end it. She didn't move. So he fired. I didn't dodge, I didn't need to. The air caught the bullet mid-flight, literally froze it. It hung in front of me like a drop of water suspended in 0G, then turned to ash. Behind me, the ground split open, and from it rose a second statue, one we hadn't seen before. Different, smaller, faster. A guardian. It didn't attack Brenner. It just stood between us and sang. One long, flat note that made the trees outside wither and the sky dim. Brenner collapsed, eyes bleeding, mouth open in a scream he never finished. Janeth was crying. Not out of fear, at least not entirely. "Alex," she whispered, voice shaking, "do you even know what you're doing?" I didn't. But I knew why I was doing it. Because the galaxy had lied. All of them. The Council, the archives, the stories. They made the Vari out to be monsters, tyrants, destroyers. But what I was remembering didn't feel like tyranny. It felt like reclamation. The Vari hadn't fallen. They had been betrayed. Silenced. Their hymns twisted into warnings. Their temples buried under fear. And now we were bringing them back. Whether the galaxy wanted it or not. The first wave of panic didn't come from us. It came from them. The Galactic Council went into lockdown within days of the beam's pulse. We didn't have direct access to the interstellar networks anymore, but Janeth hacked a fragment of a subspace feed, just enough to catch the headlines echoing across civilized space. Unclassified precursors detected in outer sectors. Vari tech awakens on multiple worlds. Human involvement confirmed. Council condemns Earth's silence. Is this the return of the Songborn? They were scared. Not just the bureaucrats, the people, the species that had built their entire civilizations on the ashes of forgotten gods were suddenly being haunted by their hymns. Some colonies reported voices in the wind. Others claimed their own monuments had begun to hum with invisible energy. A mining outpost was entirely abandoned after every worker there reported the same dream, of a crown of stars and a human face singing in a tongue they'd never heard, yet somehow understood. They called it the Chorus Plague. But it wasn't a plague, it was truth. And once it was heard, it couldn't be unheard. Here on Cerelon, the tower pulsed slower now. Its work was done. The signal had been sent, the call answered. And yet things didn't settle. They shifted. Janeth and I barely spoke anymore. Not because of hostility, but because she didn't recognize me anymore. I didn't either. My voice had changed. Not the tone, but the texture. the way it carried. When I spoke, people listened. Not just heard, listened, like every word mattered. And sometimes I didn't even have to speak at all. One morning I stepped outside, and a Null child ran to me, singing a note I'd never heard before. I knelt and placed a hand on his chest, and he froze. Not in fear, in revelation. Later, Janeth would tell me that same boy had been mute since birth. The hymns were healing them, or remaking them. Same thing, really. But of course, the council didn't see it that way. They came back. But this time, it wasn't diplomats. It was warships. 5 of them. No warning. No demands. They just appeared in orbit, and within hours they started dropping containment drones onto the surface. They didn't want a negotiation. They wanted control. And if they couldn't have that, they'd burn everything down. We tried to stop them. I stood at the edge of the temple, arms open, singing the opening lines of the first morning. A hymn meant for peace, for stillness. The Null joined in. Even Janeth, shaken but believing now, whispered the words beside me. It worked. For a moment, the drones froze in the air, their weapons powered down. Even the warships above flickered like their AI cores were choking on static. But then someone on their end overrode it. The drones fell, and they opened fire. Null screamed. Stone shattered. Parts of the temple cracked open like broken ribs. I watched 3 of them, Elder Keepers, the ones who'd first shown me the chamber, get turned to dust before I could even move. I screamed. But it wasn't grief that came out. It was sound. Ancient, violent, unwritten, a hymn not meant for life, not meant for healing, a wrath song. The tower answered it. A pulse of golden force exploded from its peak, ripping through the sky like a banshee's cry. The drones shattered mid-air. The warships blinked red and spiraled, systems failing, weapons folding inward, AI cores melting under the pressure of a sound older than math. 3 of them crashed into the ocean. 2 limped away. Janeth stood behind me, hand over her mouth. "You killed them," she whispered. "No," I said. "The hymn did. And it was only just beginning. The universe doesn't stay silent for long." After the hymn of wrath shattered the sky and sent those warships tumbling from orbit like wounded birds, everything shifted. Not just on Cerelon, but everywhere. It started with whispers. We intercepted fragments of distress signals and encoded messages, leaked from council channels and pirate comms alike. One of the Vari temples on Elarkon had obliterated a council research team. On the jungle moon of Riveka, an entire forest began to sing in unison, its flora swaying to an invisible rhythm. Then there was the asteroid outpost on Denkari 4, where reports said an old mining AI had begun broadcasting songs in a dead language, compelling even the machines to kneel. All of it led back to one conclusion. The chorus was alive. And the galaxy was dividing itself in response. Some species, those who had once suffered under the old order, started to remember. Their oral histories, long buried beneath shame and lies, began to sound a lot less like myths. Whole sectors went dark. Ships disappeared. Local governments collapsed under the pressure of ancient truths rising from the ruins. And then the messages started arriving. Not from the council, from others. Unaligned factions, rogue scholars, warlords, believers. One in particular caught Janeth's attention. A signal from a fringe planet orbiting a red dwarf in the Shikari drift. It was short, heavily encrypted, and barely translated by our tech. But the message was clear. The second hymn is known to us. The last choir still breathes. We are waiting for the blood. I didn't know what the last choir was. Not yet. But the way the temple on Cerelon hummed when we played that message back told me everything I needed. It was real. And they were calling me. Janeth sat beside me that night, watching the stars flicker above the damaged tower. The air was thick with smoke and static from the earlier assault. But the ruins still stood, still pulsing with life beneath the broken stone. "You could stop this," she said softly. "You still have a choice. You could walk away. Let it all fade again." I looked at her, and I think part of me wished I could say yes, but I couldn't. "I'm not starting something," I told her. "I'm finishing it." She nodded like she understood, but I could see the pain behind her eyes. She didn't want me to go, but she knew there was no stopping it. The Vari didn't leave heirs. They left keys, and I was one of them. The next morning, the Null finished building the vessel, if you could even call it that. It didn't have engines in the traditional sense. No metal hull, no fuel cells. It was grown, sung into shape from crystal and memory. A living ship, responsive, aware, and completely tethered to the hymns. It answered to me. Janeth gave me a small transmitter just in case. "So you can talk to us," she said, "or come back, if there's ever a place for you here again." I took it, even though we both knew I wouldn't need it. The Null sang as I stepped onto the vessel, their voices low and harmonic. Not a goodbye, but a blessing, a promise. The ship rose without sound, its form shimmering against the morning light. No flames, no roar, just a whisper through space and sky. As we breached the upper atmosphere, I looked back down at Cerelon, its ruins, its secrets, its songs, a place the Council had tried to erase, and yet it endured. Then I turned forward. Ahead of me, the stars shifted. Not randomly, deliberately, as if rearranging themselves for a path that hadn't been walked in 10,000 years. The hymns weren't just music, they were coordinates. And I was no longer just a man. I was the voice of the forgotten kings. Space felt different when the stars listened to you. I didn't steer the ship. It knew where to go. Each time the hymns whispered in my chest, a new course was set. No coordinates, no navigation systems, just sound, resonance, memory. We drifted through slipstreams and star lanes long abandoned, through black sectors and voids where time itself bent like cloth pulled too tight. The ship sang softly as it moved. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The notes it carried were old and patient, like someone humming to themselves in a room full of ghosts. And I listened. I listened because the deeper we went, the more I remembered. The hymns weren't just ancient songs. They were lived experiences, embedded in my blood. I began to dream while I was awake. I saw the golden halls of the first Vari sanctum, felt the heat of the flame choir burning in orbit around dying stars. I remembered leading armies that didn't breathe, commanding living symphonies in battle, and standing over galaxies we didn't conquer. We composed them. But even kings fall. One night, or whatever passed for night aboard the ship, I heard the first dissonant chord. It came from deep space, like a siren wailing underwater, ugly, broken, like a song sung by a dying throat. The ship jolted, not physically but emotionally. It hurt. The hymns responded. A ripple of grief passed through the ship's walls. We had crossed into something else. The grave path. It wasn't a place mapped by any known system. It was something the Vari had kept hidden, maybe even from themselves. A pocket of reality where discarded creations, broken guardians, and failed experiments were left to decay in silence. But someone, or something, was singing again. As we drifted into the grave path, the stars grew fewer, colder. The light faded until even our own glow felt intrusive. And then I saw it. A structure. It wasn't a temple, it was a tomb. Massive, twisted, shaped like a spine bent in agony, orbiting a dead sun. Around it floated the debris of forgotten wars, ships ripped apart, bones of creatures too large to be real, fragments of Vari tech half singing in static. And then I heard them. Not Vari, not Council, something older. The Dissonant. They were the reason the Vari vanished. Not the Council, not some internal collapse. The Vari had sealed themselves away to keep the Dissonant from spreading. The Dissonant were sound made wrong. Noise turned against creation. They had no form, only voices. No flesh, only echoes. Their purpose was to unmake, not destroy, but rewrite. They turned songs of order into chaos, turned beauty into suffering. They had once sung the stars backward until light itself refused to shine. And now, they had heard me. The ship shook. Not violently, but in fear. It tried to turn back, but I placed my hand on its core. "No," I whispered. "We go forward." It obeyed. Reluctantly. Inside the tomb, I saw them. Flickers in the air, like smoke learning how to speak. They didn't attack. They surrounded me, whispered my name, not with reverence, but with mockery. The blood returns. The choir bleeds again. "Shall we sing, little king?" I could feel them clawing at my thoughts, pulling memories apart, trying to twist my voice, to make me forget the melodies, to turn my hymns into screams. But I didn't scream. I sang. Not a hymn of power, a hymn of remembrance. The same melody the Null child sang to me back on Cerelon. It rang through the tomb like a golden bell, cutting through the dissonant like light through smoke. They hissed, wailed, vanished one by one. The tomb shifted, a chamber opened, and inside it sat a figure, not alive, not dead, dressed in Vari armor, face hidden behind a golden mask cracked with age. He didn't move, but I knew him. Vari royalty, the first composer, the origin of the hymns, and on his chest, embedded in glass and bone, pulsed the second hymn. The chamber was so silent, I forgot what breathing sounded like. The first composer sat motionless, his body entombed in golden armor dulled with centuries of sleep. Or perhaps death. Time didn't flow here. It hung, stale and waiting, like even time itself respected him enough not to intrude. His mask, once polished to a mirror finish, was now cracked, tarnished, worn from age or maybe regret. Beneath it, I could feel a presence, not alive in any way I could explain, but awake. Watching, I stepped closer. Each footfall echoed like a cannon blast in the stillness. Around me, the tomb whispered. Fragments of melody brushed my ears. Unfinished songs, half-formed memories, the cries of galaxies long dead. The dissonant had tried to erase this place, but something stronger had fought back and sealed it off. This room, this body, this moment. This was the Vari's last note. The second hymn wasn't just a song. It wasn't a key like the first. It was a memory too dangerous to remember. And yet here I was, its rightful bearer, the blood that refused to die. The composer didn't speak with words. He didn't move. But I felt him in my bones, a vibration that worked through my marrow, tuning me like an instrument. You carry the echo of kings, but echoes fade. I didn't answer aloud. I didn't need to. My thoughts were already part of the room. I am more than an echo. He let that sit in the silence for a moment. Then the room pulsed. Then carry more. Carry all. And that's when it hit me. The second hymn wasn't a song to be sung. It was a burden, a vault of every forgotten Vari memory, every emotion, every triumph, every failure, every betrayal, locked away after the final war, encoded into melody, stored within the composer's failing body. Because they knew. They knew they couldn't win. Not against the dissonant, not against the fear and chaos that twisted creation's song into noise. So they did the only thing left. They buried the memory of what they were, hoping that one day, when the dissonant rose again, someone would rise too. Someone who still had their voice. I reached out. My hand trembled as it touched the chest of the composer, where the crystal pulsed like a heartbeat, slowed by centuries. The second my fingers touched it, everything shattered. Not outside, inside, I saw it all. The rise of the Vari, born not of conquest but of harmony. Their cities weren't built. They grew like flowers shaped by will and song. They didn't rule by fear, but by resonance. They found the music in every species and wove it into their own. But then the dissonance began. A single Vari broke the scale. He crafted a new kind of sound, one not in tune with the universe but against it. It was brilliant, bold, and entirely wrong. It corrupted, it bent minds, it made stars scream, and it spread. The dissonant were born not of another species, but of the Vari's own hubris. Their end was self-made, and so to stop it they sealed their knowledge away. They abandoned their power. They vanished from memory not by accident, but by choice. Until me. Until we, humans, came along, young and stupid and loud, too stubborn to know what not to touch. And now, the vault was open again. The memories poured into me like fire through ice, burning and freezing everything I was. For a moment, I thought I'd die, that my mind would split under the weight of it all. But I didn't, because humans are stubborn. We don't break easy, we don't surrender to fear, and we're loud enough to shake the stars. I opened my eyes. The composer was gone, dissolved, freed. The crystal on his chest had fused into mine, its glow now pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. The second hymn wasn't hidden anymore. It was alive. In me. And the dissonant felt it. They screamed, not in fear, but in desperation, because now they remembered something they had spent eons trying to forget. Harmony hurts them. I left the tomb in silence. My ship was waiting. But it felt different now. Lighter, eager, its shape shifting to match my intent. It hummed beneath my feet, waiting for the first note. I gave it one. The first note of awakening. And we soared. The return to Cerelon was chaos. I arrived in orbit to find half the sky burning. The Council had come back with everything. Dozens of warships hovered in the upper atmosphere, dumping drones and thermonuclear payloads into the ruins below. Null screams echoed across the airwaves, drowned beneath the rumble of collapsing temples. They weren't here to contain anymore. They were here to wipe it out. I didn't ask for clearance. I descended straight into the chaos, the ship parting clouds like they were curtains. I landed in the heart of the battlefield, right where the first tower had stood. It was rubble now, shattered crystal, bloodied stone, but the earth still hummed. Janeth was there. She was injured, limping, holding her side, but alive. When she saw me, she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just listened. Because the second hymn was already vibrating the air around me. The Null, broken and scattered, began to crawl from the ruins. Their eyes widened. Their voices, weak and hoarse, began to rise, one by one, note by note. Until they joined the song I hadn't even realized I was singing, the hymn of the second dawn. The Council's ships reacted violently. Energy readings spiked. Alarms rang across open channels. They knew what it was. The second hymn wasn't just memory. It was a reboot, a calling back of everything the Vari had lost, of every choir silenced, of every guardian buried under the dust of cowardice and fear. And the galaxy was responding. Temples lit up across dozens of systems. The last choir rose from cryo-silence in the Shikari drift. The flame-born reeds ignited again over the waters of Suthi. Even the trees on Riveka began to bend toward the stars, humming. And the dissonant, they screamed louder than ever, because their silence was being broken. I raised my hands, not in anger, in invitation. "Sing with me," I whispered. The Null answered first, then Janeth, then the air itself, the earth, the sky, the buried bones of forgotten kings. And when the council fired their weapons one last time, when their ships lit up the sky with fire and fury, the hymn responded. The blast didn't destroy, it transformed. Their weapons hit the temple and scattered like dust on water. Their ships glitched, shut down, and gently floated toward the ground, powered off like toys forgotten by children. And from that silence came the last note. Not mine. Ours. Human, Null, Vari, all species, all voices together, one last chord to remind the universe. We are not echoes. We are the chorus, and we remember.